suburban eastern Australia, an environment that has, over time, evolved some extraordinarily unique groups of Homo sapiens. But today, we observe a small tribe akin to a group of meerkats that gather together atop a small mound to watch, question, and discuss the current events of their city, their country, and their world at large. Let's listen keenly and observe this group fondly known as the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
We're back, episode 423. I'm Trevor, aka the Iron Fist. Joe, the tech guy's with me. How are you, Joe?
Evening all.
And unfortunately, Scott's not with us. He's gallivanting around Mackay, entertaining friends and having a good old time. So it's just the two of us, Joe and myself. We'll be talking to you about news and politics and sex and religion. Had the week off last week. You know, Joe, after celebrating the crucifixion of Jesus, I just didn't have energy left to podcast.
You needed 3 days to respawn.
I did, yeah. So if you're joining us in the chat room, say hello. I'm going to try and put it up so I can see what the chats are. Where is that little code? There it is. Yes, if you're in the chat room, say hello. We will try and incorporate your comments if we can. And a huge agenda for this particular show. Not sure if we'll get through it. Joe, have you got anything to do tonight? Any pressing engagements?
Well, actually, I realised that I double booked myself because my friend in England has a day off and we were going to play computer games together.
Right, okay. So is that still happening afterwards? Or
well, that would be good if we could.
Right, okay. Oh, somebody in the chat with a strange name has just cropped up.
Waving hi.
Yeah. Hopefully that doesn't get worse.
Mm.
Where would that be from? I wonder if that's from Rumble.
No, that's YouTube.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well, on the agenda, what have we got on the agenda, dear listener? A little sort of crime rates boomer story. We've got Max Chandler Mather. We've got stuff about the real estate pricing and how that's working in Australia. Is capital gains tax concessions and negative gearing the problem, or is it other things? We've got a bit about the report about religious discrimination, some fun stuff about Donald Trump, a little bit about Easter with Jesus, a sub-update, a US hegemon update, China, Guyana, and of course Gaza. So that's on the agenda and see how we go. But now, dear listener, if you don't want to listen to our introductory guff as we talk about our personal lives and other things that have happened during the week, have a look at your podcast app and you will see that I've taken great time to put in there chapter marks to show you different segments so you can scoot around and fast forward or repeat things if you want to. So that's up to you. You can do that if you don't want to hear our guff, because I like starting off with recounting what might have happened during the week. And Joe, I had an incident at a cafe. So, dear listeners, some of you may know that I regularly do an ocean swim these days, and the beach was closed, so we all had a coffee instead afterwards. And it was with, let's just say, the boomer generation. And one guy started talking, and he was talking about, what's wrong with the world, and got on to, crime and how that was out of control with kids today, and kids being able to, kids basically being arrested but then being able to out on bail the next day and able to go home and stuff. And I said, you realise, of course, that crime rates are decreasing. And the look on this guy's face and another guy's face was immediately, this other guy said, oh, here we go. You must be some sort of card-carrying Labor member, are you? And he said, where did you get those statistics from? Or where did you get that from? And I said, well, it's from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Crime rates are down, except for sexual assault, which reports of are slightly increased, but there are reasons for that to do with people more willing to report. And by the way, usually the perpetrators are not strangers. And they just were not happy that I'd given them some facts that contradicted an idea they had in their head. And I said, I know where you're getting this from. You read the Courier Mail. And they said, yes. And I said, because I read the Courier Mail every day and I see that shit that they have been producing for the last 2 years. Every time there's some sort of crime that's gone on in Queensland, they've plastered it over the front page and made you think that there is some sort of crime epidemic going on. And one guy said, well, if you don't like the papers, why do you even buy it? I said, so I know what people are thinking. I know what you're thinking and why you're thinking it. So afterwards, I apologised to my wife and said, I just couldn't help myself. But Joe, I love that statistic from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It's great to have something authoritative and objectively neutral on such an issue. So that was fun.
Yes, but statistics don't change people's minds. And
No.
I've got the statistics to prove it.
Boom, boom. Very good,
Yes.
Joe. In the chat room, what is going on here? John's there. Hi, John. You haven't missed anything yet. So, right. I'm only operating on one screen, Joe, so I will not be looking at you as I go through these notes. But let me just...
That's your loss.
Yeah, it is. So, okay. And the other part of this conversation was they were talking about China, because one of the guys had visited Darwin and they said, that China owns the port of Darwin. Who let that happen? And I said, well, hang on a minute. Yeah, no, I didn't actually say that, but I said, so what's the problem? And they said, well, they can monitor everything. And I said, well, they could just hire an apartment that overlooks the harbour and monitor everything as well. Like, what do you think they're going to see when containers just get unloaded at a dock? I said, it's entirely at China's risk. Say we go to war with China and they own the port of Darwin. We just say to them, guess what? You don't own it anymore. We own it. And what are they going to do if we're at war with them? This furphy that China owning a port is somehow a risk to our national security is just complete BS. And when you just put these things out there, people don't have a response and just sort of shake their heads and look at you a bit angrily. But anyway, that was my little experience. Joe, you have become a fanboy of Yanis Varoufakis. What have you been up to with Yanis?
So I watched the documentary that you recommended, and I've also listened to his book, A Letter to My Daughter, Something to My Daughter, which was a good introduction to economics, at least from a socialist viewpoint. He's definitely probably a Marxist, from what I can read between the lines. And whilst I might not agree with all of him and think that possibly some of his assertions were a bit of a stretch, it was definitely an interesting listen. And explaining some of the reasoning why things like austerity don't work, and why you'd think that automating the workforce, automating labour would be a good thing, but that it actually has a deleterious effect on the economy as a whole. So there's only so much efficiency you can get. So I think it was quite good at explaining consequences of a lot of the policies, and also, why government debt isn't a bad thing. So it goes into a lot of those. The documentary, the first 3 parts are very much the story of the Greek financial crisis, when he became finance minister, and his recounting of his negotiations with the EU ministers
He recorded those as well. At some
Yes,
point.
well, some of them. So
Secretly, he was wired.
apparently, after the first meeting, he asked for the minutes, only to be told that there weren't any minutes, and he decided from that point on he was going to record the meetings. Not that they're in this documentary. There are some clips of him afterwards, some video diaries of him afterwards, recounting things. But it was certainly the Greek economy, and there's a bit of politics or economics involved in that recounting of what happened in Greece. And then parts 4 and 5 are much more about economics, and then part 6 is about his vision for the future, which is a pan-European political party.
I might get to it in the next couple of days. I'm away from my wife for a couple of days, and there are no squash tournaments on Squash TV for a few days. That frees up a bit of my time. So, yes, it is on the list, and you have inspired me, Joe, to get to it eventually. John asks where's Scott, and Scott has another pressing appointment of entertaining people in Mackay. So, yeah, so that's where Scott is. Right, let's talk about topics in general. And so it's a shame that Scott's not here because he doesn't. Max Chandler Mather? Is it Max Chandler Marr, I think? Not sure. I should know how it's pronounced, but I think he is a much better communicator than most of the parliamentarians. And let's be honest, that's not saying much. It's a pretty low bar. So there was a clip of him on Q&A, and I'm going to try and find that now and play you this to sort of give you an example of the communication skills of Max as he was dealing with a boomer about investors, property investors. So it's coming up. Here he is.
I'm just so angry that as a landlord, I shouldn't have to feel guilty about owning property or properties in our case. Why does it appear that all landlords are demonised and put in the same bracket?
I'm sorry, I just don't think that's fair. And the human consequences of a tax system and a rental system where a landlord can put up the rent by as much as they want at the end of every lease. Like, we desperately need caps on rent increases right now because the human consequences of that are the people I've spoken to. Single mums choosing between buying their baby's nappy rash cream or paying the rent.
But isn't it the case that actually interest rates have risen as well, that some landlords actually are in significant financial trouble as well?
The worst consequences for that is selling an investment property and making a huge capital gains. I'm sorry, but I just think... can we just get real for a second here? 30% of this country rents, and right now, just like federal parliament, there's more Andrews than renters on this panel, and I think that really the voices of renters continually get silenced because the interests of landlords get put up against renters as if they are equal. But they are not, because if a renter loses their home, they're sleeping in their car on the street. If a property investor has to sell their home, that might be bad, but they still get a huge sale price out of that home. I think we just need a little bit of perspective.
Authorised by Jay McCall, Australian Greens.
What do you think of that, Joe?
Yeah, I think he didn't mention that all property is theft. That
well, he didn't. He's been criticised for what he didn't talk about, and we're going to get onto that in a bit. But I mean, you can't talk about everything.
No. I mean, I think that maybe the individual landlords are investing in the way that the government encourages them to invest. And the problem is a system that is skewed into forcing up the price of property as the method of people who have spare income to dispose of it, whereas it could be invested in as a for instance, companies that are producing things. Rather than in a limited resource like housing. So maybe landlords shouldn't be demonised, but at the end of the day, they're doing very nicely out of it.
Yeah, I thought he made a great argument. I thought it was good communication. I think the Greens are going to get a lot of votes over the next elections. They're going to get a lot of votes.
Well, a lot of renters, probably.
Yeah, and I just know my daughter in Sydney has got a good job, well paid, but she looks at the property market and thinks there's just no way of getting into this market. It is impossible. So the Greens are going to be picking up a lot of votes for that reason and others. So it's just good to see somebody selling a story, and okay, there was a pushback from somebody and dealt with the pushback, I thought, quite well. So, yeah.
The real question is, what can the Greens do
mm,
that realistically is going to have an effect?
well, I think they can put pressure on Labor. You know, after the next federal election, there's going to be a minority Labor government, and the Greens will be saying, well, if you want this and this, then we insist on this and that. And increasingly they'll...
Has been said, how can you have a fair vote in Parliament when the average number of investment properties per MP is over 2?
Exactly. There's a lot of self-interest in
Yeah,
maintaining
absolutely.
the status quo.
Yeah, basically, the whole of the House would have to recuse themselves.
Yes, if they were to say, I've got a conflict of interest when it comes to making laws about investment properties.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I happen to have one. That's right. Yeah. Anyway, Crikey had an article by a guy called Benjamin Clark, who's also a young journalist. And the title of it was Australia Deserves a Better Left Populist Than Max Chandler Mather. And he says, if Max is trying to be Australia's answer to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, his antics this week expose him as a poor tribute act. He goes on to say that Max is brash and unapologetic, forged in the fires of student politics. The system was rigged, he told us, and it was about time someone shook things up. This journalist says, I was briefly intrigued. He's certainly a gifted orator, a savvy content creator, and a talented channeler of millennial and Gen Z rage. He's pushed the interests of renters up the Canberra's priority list, and he's championed the victims of the housing crisis. For this, he is to be commended. But his communication now unfortunately overcompensates for glaring patchiness and unsophistication on policy matters, particularly with housing. So he says here, when challenged, he doubles down on his worst impulses. Take his performance on the ABC Q&A this week, which of course was the clip I just played. Max stated categorically that the planning system was almost, or has almost, no impact on housing affordability. And this journalist says that was despite fielding the question from the CEO of Nightingale, perhaps Australia's foremost developer of affordable high-quality homes, who had witnessed the planning system stymieing his developments firsthand. I'll just pause there. The journalist is criticising Max, who pushed back against the CEO of Nightingale, and the journalist says, well, the Nightingale CEO is complaining about the planning system, and he should know. Well, maybe...
Sorry, a property developer is complaining about the thing that restricts a property developer.
Yeah.
In other news, water is wet.
Yes. Australia's foremost property developer complains about the planning system. And why wasn't Max, cognizant of that? For goodness sake. This journalist says, evidence is increasingly mounting that planning rules that limit the supply of homes, such as height restrictions, heritage protections, cumbersome neighbourhood consultation and the like, reduce the relative affordability of housing, particularly for renters. So that's the crux of his complaint, is that Max ignored planning rules that limit supply. And it's more than just the tax issues of capital gains and negative gearing that Max is sort of concentrating on. And this journalist is blaming the NIMBYs, not in my backyarders, for blocking developments. And that was in the Crikey. You know, Joe, I quite like Crikey because it's a good mix of stuff where I agree and disagree with what they say. This is an example where he might have some point kind of here, but not entirely sure that I agree with his delivery of this particular piece. But anyway, well, dear listener, you can't have media outlets that give you everything you want in 100% agreement with you. Joe, maybe even this
Apart from
podcast.
the Murdoch press.
Yes, maybe this podcast. Yeah, that's right. The Murdoch press gives a particular section of the community exactly what they want 100% of the time.
All the time, absolutely.
Yeah. Although I did see an article, today's Courier Mail, Joe, had a comic making basically fun of Dutton pursuing the whole nuclear power thing that he's on about. So I think things are starting to turn where the Murdoch press is trying to tell Liberal Nationals, stop with this. And I think the reason is that they know it's going to cost them an election. I think that's their reason. But I just started to see pushback against the nuclear option starting to appear in the Murdoch rag. So they're just massaging public opinion on that one. Anyway, I've digressed. So thought-provoking article. You listener, you don't want stuff that always agrees with you. I noticed in the comments section, though, on the Crikey website, under this article, was just packed with people calling BS on the article and taking the writer to task, and comments like, relaxing development rules doesn't improve cheap housing, it just improves developer bottom lines. Another guy said, and yet I work on local government conference after conference and see Clark's opinion, that's the journalist, elucidated by developers after developer. Developers who, at the same conferences, go on to spruik the value of their land-banked portfolios. And while Max may have missed some of the evidence, the writer of the article, Clark, is ignoring his share also. So here's the conundrum, dear listener. Is it that planning rules are too restrictive, decreasing supply of housing opportunities? Or is it that developers are sitting on applications that have been successful and are just not going ahead with the developments because if they flood
the price of land?
Yes, they've figured out that if they supply too much, the prices will go down. So they're just leaking out or dribbling out what they need without disturbing the market.
How often are land valuations done up here?
I think they're done every year or two, aren't they? Land valuations.
Because I've just got my new land valuation. It's gone up 30% since the last valuation.
Ouch. Maybe it's... And of course, that's what your rates bill is based on, Joe.
My rates bill is based on.
So a significant part of your rates bill just went up 30% as well.
Yep.
Yes.
It's not. If you're living in the property, the value of my property going up means nothing because even if I sell it, I have to buy somewhere else.
Correct. Yes. For your home. Yes.
Yeah. So it's not a good thing for me. Yeah.
In the comments section still, this guy said, referred to an article by Michael Pascoe that there is no evidence that development applications are refused by councils and strong evidence that developers are deliberately sitting out the approvals to keep the prices high. And I'm going to get to that article by Michael Pascoe in a moment. Let just me find some other comments. Another guy talked about the article by Michael Pascoe pointing out approval numbers or timeliness are not the problem, and there are generally more approved projects in the system than there are actual projects under construction. What else we got here?
Game of Mates talks about
land
developing quite a lot.
What's the name of the guy who wrote that?
There was a QUT and was it UQ professor and a University of Sydney professor.
Yeah. I'm going to be quoting him here, Murray, Cameron
That's
Murray.
it. Cameron Murray and Paul Freitas.
Yes, we're going to be quoting them in a second. So, just one more comment before I get into the article by Michael Pascoe. So, this guy says Max is making a macro argument that zoning and planning are not systemic constraints on housing. Of course, there will be individual counterexamples. His position is supported by evidence like approvals always running well in advance of completions, developers sitting on, in some cases, 10 plus years of approved supply, developers withholding completed dwellings from sale. Meriton does this with apartments to help support existing prices, and no incentive for developers to build fast enough to generate surplus supply. And Joe, it seems that if, and we'll get into it in this article, it is true that developers sit on excess supply, then you really need a government builder that's just throwing supply into the market to stop that. If you just rely on private enterprise.
Yeah, a government to force the prices down.
Yeah. And the same guy makes the argument that, the property industry has huge influence on the political system. And really, does the average person have a lot of hope in stopping property developers? Are suddenly the real estate system the sort of plucky underdogs against the NIMBY terrorists? It doesn't really sort of stack up. But anyway, the Michael Pascoe article that they referred to, I thought, well, I better go look at that. And the title of it is, "You're being fed garbage about councils creating the housing problem." Joe, I've got an awful feeling I'm going to be in a cafe at some point in a few weeks' time and arguing about this point. But anyway, and in this article, Pascoe says, councils are not to blame for the housing crisis. They are not responsible for the shortage of housing. Before a council can approve an application, the application has to be made. Turns out applications and approvals are pretty much in balance. Very few are rejected, and there are generally more approvals than dwellings proceeding. It turns out there's a large stock of potential housing already approved, but those planning approvals are being sat on by developers, awaiting the most profitable moment to start building. He says building approval numbers are easily acquired from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It publishes them monthly, and there were fresh figures out on Tuesday, and it's clear that the approvals are nowhere near enough to meet the projected or the promised 1.2 million homes over 5 years based on the current building approvals. He goes on to say the applications that have to occur before the building approvals are not as easily or frequently offered, the statistics. So he asked two housing experts, one from the University of New South Wales, Dr. Cameron Murray, and also a property buyer independent, Pete Wargent. And Pete Wargent used Victorian Department of Transport and Planning statistics to demonstrate that indeed approvals can only be made after they're applied for. For the first half of this financial year, 19,231 planning permit applications were received, rounded up to 20,000. 2,500 were withdrawn. Only 532 out of the 20,000 were refused. Not only is planning approval process not to blame, it's running ahead of developers willing and able to build. And then that Cameron Murray, Joe, that you referred to as the writer of, what was the book again? Game of Mates. Yep. He says a planning approval is the first step in a development process, and a building approval is the last step. A planning approval is needed to assess a project. A building approval assesses a building. Because there are risks in property, property owners will pre-sell. Because of this, the market regulates how quickly planning approvals are converted into dwellings. When the market is booming, many approved projects are pushed through to construction. When the market is soft, approved projects are delayed, increasing the buffer stock. Market risks, variations and lags mean that it's sensible for property owners, if you're trying to maximise profit, to keep a buffer stock of planning approvals. But they don't need to keep a buffer stock of building approvals because these are quick and come after the sales have verified the project is viable. So using Queensland as an example of just how big the buffer stocks are, he says, Dr. Cameron Murray, at the current rate of new construction, there are 5 or 6 years worth of detached housing lots as buffer stock approvals just sitting there waiting to be utilised. So he says, forget the developers whinge about planning approvals limiting supply. It's a distraction from the main game of needing bigger governments than your local council to push ahead building themselves when the market won't. And there we go, Joe. So that's the, are planning restrictions constricting supply, or in fact, is it not that's the problem, but it's just that developers are sitting on approved stock and they just don't release it until the pre-sales justify it, because otherwise the prices go down.
So, I mean, a Game of Mates talks about planning approvals and says that planning approval takes a $2 million block of land and makes it a $20 million block of land.
Right.
Because, as agricultural use, a couple of acres is 2 million, but as housing stock, it's 20 million. And he said, or they are arguing that $18 million difference goes straight into the pocket of the developers.
Yeah.
And effectively, that is a loss that we, as ratepayers, are losing out on.
Yeah.
That we could auction off these approvals to the highest bidder so that the developers would be effectively, they'd be bidding the maximum that they thought they could still make a profit at.
Yep.
And so a lot of that difference in value that the approval gives them would be coming back to us as ratepayers, and therefore we would end up paying less rates rather than developers getting richer and richer.
And the reason is the prices go up is the community has built an infrastructure of transport corridors, whether it's train lines or other shopping centres nearby or other things have been built by the community that adds to the value, which somebody can just cash in by just sitting there and waiting.
It's probably a good call that maybe there should be a department of construction, of building and selling off land plots.
Yes, because I just don't see any other solution with developers just sitting on these land banks until the time's right.
Yeah, as Watley says, why should we should stop relying on private enterprise to supply the basic needs of humans.
Yeah. Anyway, still on the Greens, they want religions to pay tax. Is that a good idea, Joe?
A caveated yes.
Okay. What's the caveat?
So I think we should remove the advancing religion as a charitable aim. We then move the charities away, split them off the church and have them as standalone charities, possibly affiliated with their church, but run as separate businesses as a charity. And then the churches themselves are run under the not-for-profit laws, the same as any other sporting and pastime club, under the same reporting requirements, and basically exactly the same as 1,000 other things.
Yes. So the problem is that automatically at the moment, promoting religion is considered a charitable activity.
Yes. And and a lot of the pushback against taxing them is, oh, but my little 50 people church couldn't afford to be taxed. And realistically, we're not talking about taxing the 50 people church.
Yep.
We're talking about making them exactly the same as your footy club, exactly the same as your swimming club. It's
Yep.
a not for profit. It's a hobby. It's a pastime. No different to any of the others.
Mm.
And what we will be taxing is the sanitariums
Yes.
and the
Hillsongs.
Hillsongs,
Yeah. Yeah.
the ones who are making and also the Catholic Church, who have
Yeah.
huge property investments.
Yeah. So there are renewed calls for religious charities to face a day of financial reckoning and pay their fair share of tax as the government prepares to table a report in Parliament on Australian philanthropy. The once-in-a-generation review, announced just over a year ago as part of the government's election vow, is being undertaken by the Productivity Commission. And the Greens senator and Justice spokesman David Shoebridge told Crikey, why should the amount of tax paid by a cereal company or an aged care manager depend on the religious beliefs of their board? It's a bizarre anachronism. And he says the Productivities Commission recommendation to limit tax breaks is well supported by the community, who know that commercial businesses should not get an unfair advantage just because they are associated with a religion. Joe, you said sanitarium, and when he refers to a cereal company, I'm pretty sure that's who he's referring to as well.
I would assume so.
Mm.
What I'd also like to see is a report on how much property has been handed to churches by the community in the past. So not bought by parishioners, but actually given by various governments, councils and governments to religious organisations on the grounds that they were a benefit to society. Because I think all of those lands should be forfeit back to the community.
Yeah.
Because there were some city centre blocks, I'm fairly sure, during the original carving up of the cities that were just handed over to the church as a, hey, you do good for the community, here you go, here's a block of land for you to build on.
And the Catholics said, we'd like the block of land at the top of the hill, please.
Yes.
I think usually. Yeah.
So I'd like to know whether they bought it or whether they were given it. And if they were given it, I'd like that land back and the profits from the sale of that land to be given to the victims of the church.
Yeah. Anyway, another reason to vote Green, I reckon.
Yep.
Good on you, Shoebridge. I mean, these are policies that Labor could easily be taking.
See, we really did need Scott here tonight.
Yeah, we really did. Yeah, maybe he knew. Actually, he did know. He looked at the agenda. Scott, are you listening to this replay as you're walking or whatever? Did you dodge it, Scott, because you knew there was too much good stuff about the Greens on this one? Maybe. I'm sure he had a good, just a conflict. He couldn't make it. Right. The Australian Law Reform Commission, dear listener, we've been talking the last few weeks how the religious groups have been worried about this Law Reform Commission report because it's suggesting that some of the privileges that religions have when it comes to discriminating against people, particularly in schools, the so-called religious belief that allows them to discriminate against LGBTIQ community and non-sort of Christians or atheists, the Commission is saying need to curtail that a bit. So that has the religious groups worried. And just to recap, Albanese said to Dutton, I'll only go ahead with this if you guys agree to it. And Dutton's not keen on that arrangement. So who knows whether anything will actually change. But anyway, yes?
I did see some of the arguments. They were lumping schools and churches in together, not churches, schools and hospitals in together. And whilst there may be a case to be made that you want religious teachers in your school, I don't see how you can make that for a hospital.
I wouldn't have thought so. Who was lumping the two together?
One of the religious leaders, I can't remember,
Right.
saying we won't be able to discriminate we won't be able to employ the people we want in our hospitals and in our schools.
Yes.
And I'm going, okay, you're saying that you want to indoctrinate children, therefore you need to have people indoctrinated in the schools.
Yes.
But when it comes to medical things, you're not indoctrinating people, you're chopping them up or giving them pills. Really, what does it matter what religion they are?
Yeah. So in this report, it was basically saying, looking at circumstances that might be considered reasonable when you might allow discrimination. And one of the sort of guidance dot points they gave was the nature of the institution, including the extent to which religious beliefs, practices, or teachings are infused throughout the activities of the institution. So the Law Reform Commission would be saying, you just run a hospital as a hospital to get people well.
And
a school's going to have
about Calvary,
the
Canberra Hospital that was
Yeah.
recently taken over.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, was taken back from
Yes.
the lease
Yes.
by the Canberra government.
Yes.
And saying, so they were basically saying, well, that was taken off of us because of this horrible, horrible law, and that we're going to get more of the same if this passes.
Yeah. Well, the Law Reform Commission is saying one of the requirements as to whether it's going to be reasonable to discriminate is to look at the nature of the institution, including the extent to which religious beliefs, practices, or teachings are infused throughout the activities of the institution. So that's going to make it more difficult for a hospital. But what I think I could see happening, Joe, is schools that normally only provide a very token reference to religion, some of our more expensive private schools that are back. Did you disappear then, or are you back?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's going to encourage some schools to go, geez, if we want to be able to discriminate against non-Christians in employment and against queer kids in enrolment, we've got to show that we're super religious in our activity. We've got to infuse religion more and more into our activities.
We're going to have a prayer at the beginning of each class.
Yes. Yes.
And the sports coach is going to have to pray over the team or even pray on the team.
Indeed. And there's going to be a regular mass ceremony they go to every Friday, and there's just going to be, I could see that the legal advice to these schools was going to be, if you want to use religion as an excuse to discriminate, you need to infuse more religion into the day-to-day activities of what you're doing. Let's see how that pans out, because people send their kids to these schools not for the religion, but for the perceived benefits of class.
But if you believe the religious people are choosing the religious schools not because they are perceived to be better than state schools, but because they want the religious teachings. Which, having been the parent of a child in a private school, is not the case.
No.
Parents jumped through the hoops, but they didn't give a damn.
Yeah. And really, the schools we're talking about here are high schools. And high school students are just going to give a lot of shit back on this stuff. If there's too much religion pushed down their throats, they're not going to cop it. I remember talking to these girls who went to Stuart Home, and they had compulsory religious instruction lessons, and they were questioning the nun about all sorts of stuff that she was coming up with. It was quite an ordeal for the nun to go through when these grade 11 and 12 girls were basically pushing back.
Us giving our Catholic RI teacher shit about Vatican roulette.
Right. Yep.
Sorry, the planning method. The what was it? the rhythm method of family planning.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. So, hey, Alison's in the chat room. Alison, did you look at that Law Reform Commission report and did you come to the conclusion that I have that religious schools are going to have to sort of infuse more religion in order to use religion to discriminate? Anyway, we'll see if that's what pans out there. But yeah, essentially you've had states restricting what can be done, and if the federal system implements laws, they'll be more in line with the states, which will be more restrictive. So the religious groups are going to hate it. Anyway, we'll see what happens. But that's the Australian Law Reform Commission. Next topic, a bit of levity, Joe. Donald Trump, always good for a joke. We were talking.
What could go wrong?
Yeah. 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? We were talking about, yes, I played the clip about Trump the athlete
Oh, yes.
and how this Trumpster guy was saying, don't know if you guys know, but former President Trump is quite the athlete. And in fact, just the other day, he played with a couple of pros and he put
beat
them
them.
to shame. And it just reminded me of the story of the North Korean dear leader, Kim Jong-il, and how there was the story of him going out and playing golf and shooting multiple holes in one on his first and only ever round of golf, and how we all laughed. Oh, those stupid Koreans, so taken with their propaganda that they'll believe almost anything. And it just sounded to me like the same thing with this guy going, oh, Donald Trump's quite the athlete, let me tell you. Like, they were equally as implausible.
Yes.
And I said, look, I think it was multiple holes in one that this Kim Jong-il did on his first round, not just one. And so I was compelled to look it up, and I found an article about a guy who was a bit of a golf pro who visited North Korea and entered a tournament, and he spoke to the club manager at the course where this fabled round took place, and he asked the guy whether he had witnessed the dear leader's fabled round, and the guy chuckled but said nothing, puffing on an unfiltered cigarette. And this golfer asked him about the record-shattering score and the unforgettable 5 holes in one. And he says, this time, to my surprise, he answered. Kim, the manager says, was of course a staggering golf talent, possessed of an enchantingly rhythmic swing. But even for a player of his abilities, 5 aces in one round were out of reach. How that stat had entered into the official record was pretty simple. The scorekeeper tracking Kim's round that day had relied on a relative to par system, marking down 0 for pars, 1 for bogey, and 2 for double bogeys. Unfamiliar with that scorekeeping shorthand, the North Korean state news agency covering the outing had read the 5 ones on Kim's card as holes in one. Forget the fact that Kim, a rank beginner, probably never sniffed a bogey all day. His alleged aces now made some kind of goofy sense. A mundane error had slipped into official annals. Dispatched proudly on the newswires by the North Koreans, only to be snickered at by the rest of the world. There you go, dear listener. Get the full story here.
However, that doesn't change the fact that all the birds burst into song on his birth.
Did they? Birds burst into song at his birth. Well, there might have been a back...
Sorry, we're singing in Korean. Singing his praises.
Joe, just like the golf hole-in-one story, there might be a simple explanation for it.
Of course.
Yeah. So, could be. Anyway.
And, of course, he doesn't go to the toilet.
Or
had you not heard that?
No, I didn't know that.
Okay. I can't remember which one it was.
Right.
One of them allegedly doesn't go to the toilet. Didn't go to the toilet.
Well, anyway, we've got an Easter message. It's bit late, but got an Easter message from Donald Trump. So, Trump impersonation, I think. Yeah.
The hands were the wrong size.
Right. Yeah. That was good. So yeah, we good to mix up. Bit of levity.
Of course, the Jesus telling his followers to be violent is actually what he said in the Bible.
Yeah. One more Trump video as well. Just the real thing this time. So the guy is completely shameless. Joe, I am increasingly convinced he is going to win the next election.
Yeah, possibly.
It's going to be incredible. He's going to pull it off. The base that the Democrats rely on are just sick of him, and
we can only hope he'll have a heart attack before then.
Well, as I said, Joe, he'll probably make it clear that he's not going to support the AUKUS deal, and from an Australian point of view, that's probably good. He'll probably pull out of a lot of stuff. He'll probably say to the Ukrainians, "No more arms for you." He'll probably, maybe even the Israelis, he might say, "No more arms for you." Like, he actually
No,
might.
I think his son-in-law will bend his ear on that one.
Yeah, so he can sell the real estate at the Gaza Strip, the sort of waterfront.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Maybe. But as crazy as it seems, it's possible that there are some silver linings on a Donald Trump second-term cloud. But fear not. In the meantime, he's helping out the world with another project. Here he is.
What can we do? Stand up, speak out, and pray that God will bless America again. I'm proud to endorse and encourage you to get this Bible. We must make America pray again. Pray, get educated, get motivated, and stand with me and the legions of Americans asking God to bless our great nation, to bring our great nation back, and to make America great again. I'm proud to partner with Lee in this offering. He's a very special man, both as a talent, but maybe even more so as a human being. He's very, very special. And I think you all should get a copy of God Bless the USA Bible now and help spread our Christian values with others. There you have it. Let's make America pray again. God bless you, and God bless the USA.
Make America pray again. Got a ring to it?
Yeah. Apart from they don't actually want them to read the Bible.
No, just pray.
Because it's the fastest way of making an atheist.
They don't want them to read it, Joe. They just want them to buy it. Yeah. $60, I think it is, for the Trump-endorsed Bible. Pretty cheap. So, yeah. Look,
anything with his name on it, yes.
Yeah. Look, we're on a bit of a roll here with clips. There's just
it
one more.
Look like a pseudo-leather bound as well.
Yes. Fake leather, no doubt. So, look, this one is as much visual as it is audio, and this is for the 12 people viewing this live stream as we talk. Just to finish off with a bit of religious fun. Here we go.
Now when Jesus was talking to his disciples, he spoke of the Holy Ghost power and might. When he had spoken, and as they beheld him, a great cloud received him right out of their sight. But Jesus is coming, oh Jesus is coming. When is he coming? Just today now. Why is he coming? He's coming to get us. How is he coming on a snow white cloud?
The bit I like about that is, why is he coming? He's coming to get us. I mean, if you've read the Old Testament, that's possibly not good news.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And why had the singer been licking an electric socket?
Oh, great visuals on that. So, Jesus is coming. He's coming to get us. He had a big smile on his face. Yeah. Yeah. All good fun. Now, a few weeks ago, Joe, I introduced the dear listener, to George Galloway, who had some really good things to say about Palestine and other stuff. And he had a really good, straight-talking mannerism when dealing with a reporter who was talking about Rishi Sunak. And the reporter was saying, oh, Rishi Sunak has said this and has said that. And George Galloway was going, I don't give a toss what Rishi Sunak says about something. Why would I care what he says about anything? And it was good, straight talking sort of stuff. And I thought, oh, that's good. Here's a new shining light on the horizon. But unfortunately, Joe, turns out he's a bit of a climate change denier.
What a shock.
It's almost like when you meet people these days, you've got to, like, before we go too far in our conversation here, can I just quickly ask you your position on climate change, COVID vaccinations, and what would be the other topic?
People of dark skin.
Yeah, and wokeness, and Jordan Peterson, and just to test people.
And Ayn Rand.
Yes, most people. She's not topical at the moment. So
No.
people Margaret Thatcher would be a better one. They said, "Oh, the great lady," but because you had an experience recently at a party or something, didn't you? With started talking to some guy and he seemed
and he was recommending Ayn Rand.
Oh,
and
was he?
Yeah, in the middle of the park was quite vocally telling us all how great Campbell Newman had been getting rid of all somebody from I can't remember what department, State Department, walked past and said, "No, the man's a complete bastard." Not a fan of Campbell Newman.
Yeah. So anyway, just so that you're fully informed of George Galloway.
Oh,
here
talking
he is
of deluded idiots.
Yes, Russell Brand.
Yes.
Is doing the interview, and Russell, like a lot of gurus, has just gone further and further to crazy right-wing territory. And
I'm not saying it's a conspiracy.
No.
But you should look very carefully.
Yes. Anyway, we'll just play a little bit of this.
Well, no farmers, no food. And I'll be on Parliament Square on Monday meeting the British farmers who've joined that worldwide movement. And we have to defend our ability to grow our own food. The idea that we can close down our farms under the bogus climate change, apocalyptic catastrophism of the so-called climate change, extinction rebellion, and so on, is perfectly absurd. What we're going to do, eat insects, eat bugs. Some of us will never do that. Some of us are unreconstructed, red meat-eating, white, straight males. I'll get my coat. I know I'm no longer wanted.
And don't let the door hit you on the arse on the way out. Something.
I'm fairly sure that Russell Brand is the sort of person who would be a vegetarian or a vegan.
He probably would be, but then he might well also move onto a fully sort of carnivore diet as well. Who knows? Russell Brand, where he's at. So, look, if you carefully read the transcript of what Galloway just said, did he actually deny climate change? No, but he sent all of this.
The farming, basically something to do with the nitrogen fertilizers, and they've banned a particular type of fertilizer because it's causing climate change.
Yes. Well, it relies on sort of fossil fuel energy to create it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a question whether we can feed people efficiently without using nitrogen fertilizers.
And there might be a perfectly reasonable argument in relation to that and questioning all that. But he was throwing a lot of red meat out to a particular audience with all that and giving a vibe that wasn't well thought or rational. So there we go. George Galloway, you just can't get perfection anymore, Joe, in your political leaders. They've all got some little problem as perceived by me.
Yeah.
or you or us.
Why? What's wrong with Bernie?
Bernie Sanders,
Hmm.
he's a bit pro Israel, I think. It took him a long time to come around.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. What do we got next? That's probably enough clips for a while. I've had this just for a long time. Ida Buttrose, when she quit ABC, like the ABC has been targeted relentlessly by News Corp, especially during her tenure. And when she resigned, she chose to give her exit interview to a Murdoch journalist from the Sunday Telegraph in return for recording a podcast with Sarah Lee McQuand. So, where she got superstar treatment in a photo shoot in the Stella magazine. So, instead of telling Murdoch to F off because of the years of torment they gave her ABC, her exit interview, she actually did everything with them. So, thanks for nothing, Ita. And her contribution to the ABC was pretty poor at the end of the day. I remember when she was appointed by Scott Morrison, I thought, oh,
Yeah, I remember you held out such hope.
I did. Turns out he knew what he was doing with that one,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. Labor has been rushing through new immigration powers, or trying to. And it's because they're frustrated by people who are subject to deportation or removal. And Joe, guess what? They're not cooperating with their removal. They simply refuse. They simply refuse to sign applications for a passport or for transit visas, etc., that would enable them to be taken out of Australia. And it's been compounded by some governments, notably Iran, refusing to take them back if they don't return voluntarily. And so the government has proposed new legislation to make it a criminal offence if a non-citizen does not cooperate in their deportation, getting at least 1 to 5 years jail. So, okay, guys, if you're not going to sign these forms, we're going to make you guilty of this offence. Seems to be...
Joke's on the government because they get to stay in jail.
Yeah. Particularly directed at Iranian detainees. And there's 186 of them in detention at the end of December 2023. Of course, there's concern that the way the legislation is drafted, even if just on the face of it you don't like the sound of that, it's potentially going to catch a lot more situations than what people think. And really, we've got to give these people some sort of pathway to permanent residency. But I reckon, well, I've been saying for a while, Albanese is just ScoMo without the smirk. And from Paul Bourgeono in the Saturday paper, he writes, earlier in the month, legal advisors in Home Affairs were asked to draw up new laws to deal with these people who refuse to cooperate. Legislation was duly prepared, sent to the ministers last week, but someone in the back rooms of the Labor Party thought it would be a good idea to keep it all secret. There's an immigration minister, Andrew Giles, and he said that these were sort of laws targeted at non-citizens who are on a removal pathway. And so on 7:30 on Tuesday morning, the government's cunning plan swung into action. The shadow immigration minister, Dan Tehan, was contacted and told that the opposition would be given a briefing half an hour later on legislation. And similarly, the Greens and the crossbench were briefed and told the legislation would be introduced later that day and forced through the parliament with little or no debate and scant scrutiny. And the government had the numbers to pass it in the House of Reps, but was counting on the coalition to wave it through the Senate. In the end, it got through the lower house, but when it got to the Senate, the Greens and the crossbench decided more inquiry was needed. But, Joe, this is the sort of shit that the Morrison government would do is like just throw a piece of legislation like that at the opposition the morning and say, we're running it through Parliament today. Just no wonder we get crappy decisions when there's no chance to examine this stuff and talk about it. But just crappy bullshit politics by Albanese is very disappointing. I had a bit like Ita Buttrose, Joe. I had high hopes.
Yeah, I mean, he was a bit of a grey man from the beginning, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, John Major had more charisma.
Yeah, I think so. He might have had even more principle. It's just,
Probably.
what sort of Labor government is this? It's just a shocker. Just he's making all the same mistakes of Morrison without the smirk.
Well, Labor are concerned that the Murdoch press might say something bad about them, and therefore
Yeah. And they
desperately
say something.
chasing after pleasing Murdoch, aren't they?
Yeah. They say something bad anyway. And I mean, Joe, don't get me started on the subs again. Here's Richard Marles talking about the submarine program.
We are spending an enormous amount of money.
There we go.
Is that it?
There's a true thing you said.
Okay.
We are spending an enormous amount of money. How are we going for time? 9:10. Let's keep going. Joe, America has been in charge of this world for a long time and could just throw its weight around and tell people what to do. But it's all changing now. Is hegemony pronounced hegemony or hegemony?
I think it's a G, a J, rather than a G.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast today and they were using hegemony. So I'm not sure the correct pronunciation. But let's just go with hegemony for the moment. So Iran is planning to unload $50 million worth of oil from a Marshall Islands flagged tanker seized by Iranian naval forces in the Gulf of Oman last year. Washington had seized several ships of Iranian oil in what it said was operations at enforcing US sanctions. As a result, Tehran accused the US of engaging in maritime piracy and the US had seized Iranian oil, and in response, Tehran seized the Suez Rajan as it transited in 2024, and they're going to sell off the oil. Joe, I just see that as indicative of a little change in power, really, where, America has enforced sanctions against Cuba and Venezuela and other groups, and, they stole some Iranian oil, and Iran turned around and said, okay, we'll steal some American oil. And you no longer the hegemon when countries can do that to you.
When countries can challenge you. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And as Yemen has done with a few drones, as Russia has done in the Ukraine, sort of, the thing about the Russian-Ukrainian battle, Joe, is that Russia's producing the armaments and the ammunition and whatnot that the West just can't produce. So while America's been spending a huge proportion of its GDP on defence, they just don't have enough of this sort of infantry bombing stuff to match what the Russians are doing. And they're just running out in the Ukraine. They just don't have the stuff to give them. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
I was watching Perun again talking about the Baltic states. And effectively, Russia is throwing everything at this because they think they can outlast America, and the West's will and focus. They think that we are fickle and that we will get distracted and we will lose attention.
Mhm.
And that if they carry on for long enough, they will win by attrition.
Mhm.
And the Baltic states are very worried that this will be the case because they fear that they are next.
Mhm. So, has this Perun character, has he are you still there? You're back
Yeah,
now.
I'm back. Yep.
Has he given up on the skirmish line changing at all? Does he concede now that Russia will keep that territory it's got, or does he still think that the Ukrainians can mount a successful counterattack and it's all just a matter of was he giving
It's a
up on that?
question. Well, no, it's a question of logistics.
Yeah.
So,
but what is he saying will happen? He thinks it's still possible for Ukraine to regather that territory, does he?
basically, if they can outlast the Russians, then yes.
Okay. But they could actually force them back.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't think many commentators are saying that. I think he's on his own now.
I mean, he's not really talked about it. I mean, he's much more about logistics.
Yeah, but he used to say that, didn't he? That he was very bullish on Ukraine's.
He was always hedging his bets.
Okay. All right. I just thought I've never liked the guy's proposals. I just felt that you and Scott were sort of on board with him, and I know that Decoding the Gurus were kind of on board with him as well. And I was like, I don't know, it doesn't seem to make sense to me. But okay, you reckon he was a bit more cagey than that initially? So
yeah, it was always a given proper support. But the problem is with the Republicans in the US refusing to provide funds. The Ukraine doesn't have the logistics. They've done incredibly well with the constrained logistics they've been given.
Mm.
The shooting down of very, very expensive aircraft was totally unexpected. Their drone strikes into the heart of Russia. They have exceeded what everyone thought at the beginning of the war.
Right.
And given an equivalent amount of arms, ammunition, and men as the Russians have had, they would have done considerably better.
Yeah. Well, I just don't see them, even now, if they were getting all that, it's very hard to push back against a line that's already been set. So
it is, absolutely.
Yeah, they're going to have to give up on that. Of course, Joe, one of the things when it comes to free trade, lots of countries would like to be able to set up trade barriers so that people can't sell stuff to their economy. But it falls foul of free trade rules, and effectively when the West put those sanctions on Russia, it actually created an advantage for them because suddenly they had to make stuff that previously they couldn't make because it would have been uncompetitive with imports. So the Russian economy actually benefited from sanctions because it gave their local manufacturers and producers a chance to.
But they have been borrowing very heavily from
Russia?
The future. Yes.
With so much
Internally.
oil. With so much oil. They sell so much oil. You're saying that.
Yeah. The defence spending has been so huge that will cause a huge problem for them in the future. It will be interesting to see how this war has impacted them long term.
Well, yeah. Look at GDP. Russian economy is going very well.
Yeah, well, we all know about GDP, don't we?
Yeah, but what else can we measure? I mean, anyway, yeah, okay. I'm interested to see what the
'Cause-
figures are on that.
Yeah, you know, setting fire to Russia would increase their GDP.
Yes. Well, give me some other. Okay, so you reckon that there's been a big shift in.
We know their overseas arms sales have dropped considerably.
So they've
It's a
had
big
to.
source of money.
So they're borrowing. Is that what you're saying?
Basically, they've had to spin up their defence sector, which has pulled in a lot of labour, but effectively there's a lot of things that aren't being produced because they're producing arms and ammunition.
Right.
And that all of this is government spending, which is great for the economy in the short term, but longer term may not be so great.
Right, but the government, you're saying, is getting into debt through that spending.
Effectively, there will be a war debt because of this, whether they're selling bonds or I don't know what, how they're
right, and debt owed to some other country somewhere.
No, I think it might well be internal. I don't know.
Okay, well, how do you get an internal debt?
You borrow from the people.
Okay, so they aren't getting enough revenue from gas and oil sales, and they've had to borrow from private lenders in the Russian economy.
Yeah, I don't know where they're getting this money from. I just know that I don't think it's from their revenues.
Okay. Well, Joe, you've set me a challenge. I'm going to have to look up the sources of the Russian economy over the next couple of weeks. I suspect it's doing better than a lot of people think, but we'll see where we go with that one. Let's see. What else have I got in here? Oh, new topic, Joe. The TikTok ban. So, support for the TikTok ban in Australia. We've got strongly support, somewhat support, neutral, somewhat oppose, and strongly oppose. And from March 24 in the Essential poll, where it asked the question, there have been calls for the Australian government to pass laws that would ban the use of TikTok in Australia unless the parent company sells to another company that is not based in China. To what extent do you support or oppose the ban on TikTok in Australia? And overall, Australians, 28% strongly support and 17% somewhat support. So that was 45%, Joe, with a 31% undecided. So 45 in favour and 30% undecided. Pretty strong opinion. Only 25% against in some manner. Most people want TikTok banned. Now,
I don't blame them.
And what's your reason, Joe? Because of the evil China or some other reason?
No. Because it's
a blight on our youngsters' time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But then, Joe, they're just going to go and use some other program, aren't they? Like, I'll go back onto Facebook, where all their parents are.
Yeah, I was going to say Facebook's awful too.
Yeah. Let's do it by age. If you ask 18 to 34-year-olds whether they want TikTok banned, only 26% would agree. Meanwhile, 45% would disagree. The rest were undecided. But let's talk about that boomer generation, shall we? Well, the 55 plus.
After they had TikTok explained to them.
You want TikTok banned, old man? 44% strongly support, 18% somewhat support. What are we up to? 62% in favour. Only 11% against. 27% did not know.
Captain Hook wants it banned.
Yeah. And if you're looking at it by voting intention, if you're a Greens voter, the majority don't want it banned compared to, of course,
Well,
if you're...
that's because they're communists and they
Yeah.
align with the Communist Party of China.
Yes. And the coalition and independent or other party, I'm thinking Pauline Hanson and Teals, perhaps, strongly in favour of banning TikTok. 53% in favour. Amongst Labor voters, let me see, Labor voters, 38% in favour of banning, 28% wanting to leave it alone. More votes for the Greens coming, Joe. There we go. I went crazy on clips this Easter. I've got some more clips for you, dear listener. We haven't done much on China. We haven't done enough on China. There's evil Chinese and their TikTok. God damn them. Let's just see what they've been up to with another clip, shall we? John in the chat room says, how do the figures trend with actual users of TikTok? If we just go on age, John, I think it's the 18 to 34-year-olds who use it, who don't want it banned. And it's the old fogies who don't use it, who want it banned. Funny how that works. Yeah. Also on Perron, it's because you disagree with him. He's an analyst, not a predictor. It's Perron. I thought he was predicting.
I don't think he was.
Okay. He's just saying what was happening rather than what will happen.
Yes, I mean, he might have said what could happen, but...
John says I'm ill-informed on this topic. Thanks, John. Maybe I'm informed but just wrong. I mean, that could be more likely, perhaps. Anyway, let's get back to China. What have they been up to, Joe?
If you look at the Western and the imperialist countries, they come with their own interests. The vice president of the US came to Zambia, landed at a Chinese-built airport in Zambia, moved on a Chinese-built road in Zambia. The venue of this summit was actually a gift to Zambia by the Chinese government. And that was where this Summit for Democracy was held, in Zambia.
To tell African people don't work with China.
Right. And the key agenda of this summit was to curb Africa's cooperation with China in a Chinese gift to the African continent. One of our major referral hospitals in Zambia, which is called Levi Mwanawasa Teaching Hospital, was a gift to the Zambian people by China. But even in Zambia, very few people know that this hospital was a gift. Zambia did not pay $1 for that hospital. If you went and saw the little placard that says gift from the Chinese people, it's the size of an A4 sheet of paper. And this is a massive hospital that deals with over 2,600 referral cases a month. But China is so humble in the way they deal with us on the African continent. If this was an American gift, it would be reported in media from the US to Latin America to Europe to Australia. The whole world would know about this gift to the African continent.
See how sneaky they are, Joe? Giving away money like that? I don't trust them. Not to be trusted.
Well, the question is, what price a free gift?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a falling out between Zambia and China, China might just take that hospital back.
Possibly.
Yeah. Just not sure how they're going to put it on a ship, get it all the way back. But that's...
Or like the people who didn't get paid for the driveway and ripped it up.
The people who paid for a driveway? What?
No. There were some builders who laid a driveway. It was in the press.
Oh,
about a
okay.
month ago.
I think I did see that. It came back because they didn't get paid. They jackhammered it up or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. So, people in the global south, dear listener, fighting back and saying "f you" more often than they used to. Here's Joe. We're travelling all over the world, Guyana. In this ill-informed little podcast that I'm running here. See how we go with this one.
Let's take a big picture look at what's going on here. Over the next decade, 2 decades, it is expected that there will be $150 billion worth of oil and gas extracted off your coast. It's an extraordinary figure, but think of it in practical terms. That means, according to many experts, more than 2 billion tons of carbon emissions will come from your seabed, from those reserves, and be released into the atmosphere. I don't know if you, as a head of state, went to the COP in Dubai.
Let me stop you right there. Do you know that Guyana has a forest forever that is the size of England and Scotland combined? A forest that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon? A forest that we have kept alive? A forest that we have kept alive.
Does that give you the right? Does that give you the right to release all of this carbon?
Does that give you the right to lecture us on climate change? I am going to lecture you on climate change because we have kept this forest alive that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon that you enjoy, that the world enjoy, that you don't pay us for, that you don't value, that you don't see a value in, that the people of Guyana has kept alive. Guess what? We have the lowest deforestation rate in the world. And guess what? Even with our greatest exploration of the oil and gas resource we have now, we will still be net zero. Guyana will still be net zero. With all our exploration, we'll still be net zero.
Powerful words, Mr. President.
I'm not completed as yet. I am not finished as yet. I am just not finished as yet. Because this is a hypocrisy that exists in the world. The world in the last 50 years has lost 65% of all its biodiversity. We have kept our biodiversity. Are you valuing it? Are you ready to pay for it? When is the developed world going to pay for it? Or are you in the pockets? Are you in the pockets of those who have damaged the environment? Are you in the pockets, are you and your system in the pockets of those who destroyed the environment through the Industrial Revolution and now lecturing us? Are you in their pockets? Are you paid by them? Are you paid to keep their...
Something about me, Joe, just enjoys people who just say F you to people who are previously pompously in charge and maybe no longer are.
Absolutely. Britain enjoyed 2 centuries of burning coal and oil.
Yeah.
And absolutely fair play for him to say, look, you lot have polluted. And maybe if you don't want us to sell our oil, maybe you should be paying us for the forest that hasn't been ripped down, burned.
Yeah. And I just enjoy that turnaround where they've just gone, you big goddamn bully, F you, and just don't lecture us, I'll lecture you. Like, I just enjoy that sort of straight talking, as you might have come to learn, dear listener. Join the chat room. China pay for influence, the US bomb for influence. Exactly right. Mind you, China's not allowed to buy companies and other stuff. So if they're going to use the money that they've acquired over the last couple of decades, they've got to put it somewhere. So the Belt and Road is what they're doing. And
they can buy some opium.
Yes. And they've, creating railroads and things. And in case the seaways are blocked by, I don't know, American submarines or something like that. It seems like a good idea just to spread infrastructure around.
Well, they certainly won't be Australian submarines.
No. Well, it might be Australian, but just run by an American. We would have paid for it, Joe.
Well, exactly. Yes.
We might have the title of it, but somehow it's on a permanent lease to America. Yeah. So, yeah, there we go. What else have I got here? What are we up to? Look, I couldn't do justice to what's going on in Gaza in the remaining time, and this has been long enough. I think next week will be a bit of a examination of the atrocity that is occurring in Gaza and what is happening there. I think it'll be a bit of a Gaza episode next week. Joe, there we go. What else is in the chat room? John says, "Don't worry, Trev. We will never see US subs." I know we'll never see them, John. I'm just worried how many billions of dollars we're going to hand over before we realise we're not going to see them. That's the problem.
I think we're going to buy them with Apple Pay gift cards.
Anything else in the chat room I should have seen? Watley says, Ida was always a corporate stooge. Yes. John says, Jordan Peterson has gone right off the reservation now. He sure has. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, dear listener, hope you enjoyed that episode. We'll be back next week. Talk to you then. Bye for now.
And it's a good night from him.